The scariest spy I ever met was a lady in her late 50s. Everything I had thought about her was a lie, and that she had played me like a child. Nobody knew, and I wanted to tell everybody. That's what, can I not tell people? And they said, if you tell people, you tell the terrorists. I think it's fair to say I'm an unlikely writer, and that I grew up in a house with no books in it. My parents just didn't understand reading for pleasure. It just wasn't something they did. From a very early age, I was obsessed with books. That absorption of reading and of stories, of tales, I think that made me what I am. I was continually told it was not a career, which is true. It's a terrible career. My parents wanted me to study business because they thought that was practical. And I think my mother thought I'd marry a banker, and that was a good place to meet one. And so I studied business for 1 year. It was very interesting. I watched the film All the President's Men at about 2:00 in the morning on some random channel on a black and white television. And it's the book about Woodward and Bernstein and Nixon, and journalists basically uncovering a plot and then overthrowing, in a way, they're reporting overthrowing a corrupt presidency. I was so dazzled. I just suddenly knew. It's like a light bulb went off, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. This is it. This is writing with a paycheck that makes things better. Like, those are the three things I want in the world, is to be able to support myself, to be able to write, and to somehow make things better. So I changed my area of study to journalism, registered at a different university because the university I was in didn't offer it, and then told my mother I'd done it in that order. And she was livid, but I was 18. And I was paying my own way through college, so there was nothing she could do. I loved it. Like, it was the first time I really did something in school, and I was the best at it. Like, I knew quantifiably, even if my grades didn't always reflect it for reasons that are extremely unfair. I just knew, like, I was selling articles by the time I was 20 years old. I was supporting myself writing already. I worked for the student newspaper. I sold articles to professional magazines. It was weird how quickly it worked. After university, I applied to 40 small newspapers in the southern US because I lived in Texas, and got rejected by all except one in Savannah, Georgia. The Savannah Morning News offered me a job as a police reporter. And I said yes immediately. They hired me over the phone. I didn't know what a crime reporter did. Newspapers at schools don't have them. So I was there and hired and in, and I understood on the first day I worked on my own, because I went to cover a body being pulled from the river. And that is real. That's when it all got very real. And I understood what a crime reporter was, because I had to get myself down to the river for one thing, find out where the police were, get my car there, get myself hike across to the river itself, get down to where they were, following their voices really, in the end, through the mud in my 3-inch heels, which was a bad idea. I never wore heels again. That was the first time I ever saw a dead body. It was a body that had been in a river in the south in May, so it was 90 degrees for several days. So I could smell it before I saw it. I just had to make certain decisions all at once. Like, I'm not going to throw up. I'm a grown-up. I can handle this. I'm going to remember my training. I'm going to ask the police questions. And so I went over to the detectives, who, it turns out, were homicide detectives, and introduced myself as the new crime reporter from the Savannah Morning News. They were bemused, I think, by this child in heels in ankle-deep mud with a notepad. And I did exactly what I'd been taught, which is I said, "Can you describe the body to me?" Very firmly. And the detective said, "Well, he's lying right there. Why don't you describe him?" And that's when I really understood as well that this wasn't going to be easy, and that it wasn't like school. This was real life.
So you worked there for 5 years as a crime reporter. When did you move to England?
I left Savannah and I ended up moving to New Orleans and going to work for a number of different, mostly wire service. And it's while I was doing that I got offered a job in London. So I went to work. I worked for 5 years for a publishing house, actually, as an editor for Time Out. And I loved it. And then it ran out of money, as happens in this business. You know, by then I was not going back to where I'd come from. I was very settled, but I felt like I needed something different. I felt like it was time for something, but I didn't know what. And my telephone rang, and it was a woman I had met briefly when I worked at Time Out, but did not know well. I did not even know how she had my phone number. And she asked if I was available or looking for work. because she said she'd taken a job working for the government and she was looking for somebody who could write about terrorism and not get scared. And she thought of me because she said she knew about my background as a crime writer. Again, I'm not sure how she knew that. I don't remember telling her. And I didn't pause to think what that meant, terrorism, and what department I would be working for. This was, 5 years after September 11th. It was after the bombings in London on the Underground, and everything felt very fraught. It was a time of great anxiety. And that felt like a job that would make a difference, actually. There was panic, and there's 14 million people in London, and 14 million people have to get home. Nobody was telling them where to go. So people walked. But there were trains, there were buses, there were tubes that were working that were safe. But there was no way to communicate to them. There was no direct communication. There was just chaos. And the government recognized that, and they wanted somebody there who could handle basically talking directly to the people. And that was going to be me. Just getting in is an accomplishment. So you walk into a tube that closes around you on all sides. It holds you there for 5 seconds and then either lets you out or doesn't. If it doesn't, you go back and talk to the security guards. And nobody knew what happened in the tube. We all had, theories like, is it bomb sniffing? Is it, chemicals? Then you're in a big atrium where you can see all the way to the top. You can see to a glass roof. When you're in the atrium looking up, you can see every floor where everybody's working, except for one. And that floor is encased in black, blast-proof glass. And that's where the spies were. And if you took the lift, on every floor, when you stepped out, you could see from one end to the other, you could see everybody all the way down, except on that floor. When you got off the lift on that floor, there was just a door with a biometric lock. And if you got through the biometric lock, there was another door with a different lock. That's how separated the spies were from those who were not spies. Now, I was not a spy. And so if I wanted to go to that floor, someone had to take me. Someone had to come down and get me. This didn't happen. In fact, I didn't meet a single spy for 2 weeks. I was told they would come to me. We just want you to get used to the software. We want you to get comfortable, they would say. During that time, I met a young woman in the kitchen who also said it was her first week and that she worked in the legal department. And she was a little younger than me, about maybe 5 years younger than me, normal looking, long blonde hair, big brown eyes, cool clothes, but not too cool, very okay in the civil service, government approved. Funny, very smart. And we had a quick conversation in the kitchen like you do, like, do you know where the spoons are? Can I use this milk? Kind of thing. I didn't really think about it. And then the next morning, she was in the coffee shop I went to every morning on my way to work. At the time I ran into her there. And we were like, oh, it's you. How marvelous. Had that kind of a conversation you have. And we thought we might go to lunch one day. And then she called me like the next day and said, do you want to do lunch? And we did this several times. We ran into each other all over the place on the bus, like I guess you do in Westminster. So I didn't really think about it. Very interested in my background. And she asked a lot of questions about my family, my parents. How did I end up in England and how long had I been there? And what had I done before? And why did I want to work for the government after all that? Why would I change like that? And I just thought I'd made a friend. I blossomed in her attention, I must say. It was so nice because that building was so big and quite lonely to have somebody who just have an Insta friend, as the kids say. And then one day we were having lunch. This was about the beginning of the third week, I would say. We were in the building. Now, mind you, back then, because it was such a time of high security, there were constant alarms. We were constantly told, stay in your seats, don't leave your seat. There's a security threat, constant security threats. We were very used to it. And at first it was frightening. And then after a while, it was kind of normal. But on this day, it was different. We were at the salad bar and there was an alarm I'd never heard before. It was 3 beeps. And then a male voice said, leave the building immediately. Leave the building immediately. And I was terrified because suddenly I knew this is real. This is a thing. This isn't a test. Something's happening. I looked at her. I don't know why I looked at her. And I said, what do we do? And she said, wait. And her voice had changed. Like suddenly she wasn't cute, blonde, younger than me girl. She was like a soldier. She was official. Wait. And then the announcement came again and said, leave the building immediately. And then she said, fuck. And she dropped the tongs with the salad and said, come with me. And it was all different. Suddenly I was the obedient secondary person, and she was in command, and we walked up the steps, and these doors I'd never seen before had opened, and people were flooding out of the building. My heart was pounding because I thought, bombs, death, this is it. My parents told me I shouldn't come to England. And we got outside into the street. It's a bright, sunny day, and I couldn't breathe. I was so frightened. And I just looked at her and said, where do we go? Like, where do we go? And she thought for a second, and she said, Starbucks? And I said, is that okay? Like, do we have to go to like a attack meeting place? And she was like, if it's going to blow up, we'll see it from Starbucks. And so we went to Starbucks, we had a coffee, and then we went back in the building, and I never saw her again. She disappeared after that. Her phone number didn't work. She herself, her email bounced back that she was gone. There was nothing. There was no her. And the next day, a man came down and explained who he was, that he was with intelligence, that he would be my contact. If I ever needed to speak to the spies, I should call him and he would take me to them. He would arrange everything. And it took me months to realize what had happened, that she was a security check, that she had spent 3 weeks making sure I was double checking everything that they thought they knew about me, and that now they decided I was safe enough to meet one spy. Everything I had thought about her was a lie, and that she had played me like a child. So after I met my contact, I had regular meetings with intelligence. So people from MI5, people from MI6. I would explain what we were working on. So we need to communicate more about, say, travel during a terror attack. What do you do? Where do you go for contact? I wanted to set up a Twitter feed. I wanted to set up a Facebook page where we could directly communicate. And everybody wanted to say no. So we had to have lots of meetings where I explained Facebook in some detail to men in gray suits who specialize in stopping us all from getting killed. And they would listen intently and then just say, are you completely mad? Do you have any idea how insecure that is? There's absolutely no way we would ever do that. They tried to make me understand why the things I wanted to do were impossible for them. Talking to people, telling people things is the last thing they ever want to do. It's literally the bottom of the list. And what I was there to do was to say, if you don't talk to people, they're more frightened. When I went to work for the government, I wouldn't take the tube at all. I was too frightened because of the bombings. And I'd just become phobic. And everybody I knew was phobic. Everybody was either on a bike or they were walking, bus, anything but the tube. I told this to one of the spies once in one of these meetings, trying to explain why we needed to talk to people directly. And he said, you really don't take the tube? And I said, no, I haven't taken it in months. Actually more than a year. He thought for a minute and he said, I take the tube. My wife takes the tube. My teenagers take the tube. You can take the tube. And after that, I took the tube, because if the spies took the tube, it was safe. That was what I wanted to tell people. They were doing this thing while I worked there. The spies were. It was called Prevent, the program. Not the most original name, but a very, very accurate one. They literally, the guys I dealt with and the women I dealt with, spent all day, as they would say, thinking like a terrorist. If I wanted to hurt the most people, where would I go? And they would go look for places that if they were a terrorist, up football stadiums, train stations, big bus stops, any place that we gather. And then they would find ways simply to make blowing that up harder. And it was just so clever. It was mostly closing streets, bollards, and people didn't notice, but I would notice because I knew they were doing this, that bollards were springing up like daisies everywhere you went. If you walked in front of a train station, they wouldn't be there one day and they would be there the next, preventing a car or any large vehicle that could carry a really deadly bomb from getting anywhere near enough to do damage, making it pointless. It was brilliant. It was so clever. And nobody knew. Nobody knew. And I wanted to tell everybody. Can I not tell people? And they said, if you tell people, you tell the terrorists.
So could you tell who was a spy and who wasn't?
Oh, man. Absolutely not. This is the thing. It was such a weird world because my immediate team were all, as far as I knew, and I still don't know, non-spies, right? I think we were not spies. Any of us could have been, though. And so we were all everybody was suspicious. Even the spies were suspicious because the spies cannot and do not know who all the spies are. On my team, we would talk to somebody a lot who would come down with information or who we dealt with. And then somebody might say, he's a spy, isn't he? And then we'd all go, is he? I don't know. And also just having that conversation, if somebody in that conversation was a spy, it would get back to the spies that there was curiosity And that didn't look good because curiosity is something they hate. So we didn't have those conversations very often. They regularly go away to the countryside to basically blow stuff up and then deal within real time how they would handle it if it happened somewhere else, as say it happened in a city or if it happened in real life. So they would go blow up something like an old chemical factory and then trace where the chemicals would go, if there had actually been those chemicals there. So where would the wind have blown those chemicals, and would it have killed people? Is that a target people would use? And if they did, how would we get people out? What's our system for this? How many people would die? They called the spy training games. They were games, or they gamed out, basically, the various things that might happen, scenarios. And I knew the person who was the game master, so he designed the games. So for example, there might be, say a chemical factory got blown up, and then, say, at the same time, a school bus was kidnapped because the chemical factory blowing up might have just been a distraction. They have to find that, and maybe the terror groups gets divided. And so you don't know where all the terrorists are. And so they would be gaming out, how are you going to find them? How are you going to find the kids? How are you going to put out this fire? How many people are going to die? And they would borrow soldiers who would come in and play the public. They would wear tabards that said person. And then if they died because of chemicals or terrorists, they had to put on a red tabard that said dead. And then at the end, they'd be counted so they could get a feel for how terrible this would be. It was incredibly serious. Like the entire cabinet office would be there. All the senior government people would come. The tops of MI5, MI6 would go. Everybody would be there to watch this. This stuff is, like, it sounds funny in a way. Dead tabards. It's so important. While my friend was setting it up, one in particular was in rural Wales, in the middle of absolutely nowhere. He was down doing a sort of a recce, just to get an idea. And he said in this village where they were staying, there was only one pub that was served food for dinner. And he and his partner, who was working with him, were both in there. They walked in and he said, there were two CIA officers. There were two CIA in there. And I said, how'd you know they were CIA? And he said, I knew. You just know. And he was like really puzzled about it. It really bugged him. He said, what were they doing there? Like, we're not involving the Americans in this. Nobody knows we're doing it, obviously. Like, it's a secret. Are they training that I don't know about? Like, what are they doing there? And I said, so did you ask them? And he said, of course not. You can't ask them. And so I said, well, what'd you do? And he said, I gave him the spy nod. And I went to my table. What's the spy nod? And he said, you just go. And then you walk by so that they know that I know who they are. So even the spies are paranoid. God knows if they were really CIA, but he knew, like, he was confident. He's never wrong. How you could tell CIA by looking at them. I loved that they were as paranoid in a way as we were about who was a spy and who wasn't. And that also, it really bugged him that they were there.
What's the one thing about real spies that would shock people to know?
They look like you and me. They look like grandmothers. The scariest spy I ever met was a lady in her late 50s. She was frightening. I don't know why. You're going to ask why. And I'm going to say, I don't know. Incredibly intimidating, incredibly fierce. She had seen things and done things. I don't know who she was. I never necessarily knew anybody's real name. And that's one thing that makes it an even playing field if you're dealing with spies and you are not a spy, is they literally know everything about you. They know how much is in your bank account. They know what your credit card debt is, and you don't even know their real names. I had been there more than a year and a half before I realized nobody I dealt with in that world used their real names. They like it that way. It's best that you don't know anything about them. So honestly, they trust me enough to let me into the room. But if somebody tortured me to tell them who they were, I wouldn't know. To this day, I don't know.
Did you ever see or hear anything that you weren't supposed to?
When you sign the Official Secrets Act, nobody ever tells you what the secrets are after that. Nobody ever says when you walk into a room, this meeting, this is the secret one. It's just your judgment. So my judgment was there were plenty of things that I've never ever talked about and never would. And I didn't talk about any of it until at least 5 years had passed. And more than that has passed by now. So I feel comfortable talking about what I talk about because everything will have changed. Everything will be different. There was once at a spy training camp that I went to, I walked down a hallway. I was looking for the ladies' room. It was quite a confusing place. And there was a door that had a sign on it that said, do not even touch this door if you are not top secret cleared. I think in all of us, there's something in you that's like, I have to know what's behind that door. Like, I have to know. But No, I walked by the door. You walk by the doors when you're in that world.
You mentioned the government and the Prime Minister.
Mm.
Where are they in terms of the hierarchy?
Do you know, it's funny because I actually, this is in a way, because I'm a novelist. I write novels about spies. And one of the things I write about is this: spies don't want any part of politics. They want to be completely outside of it. And yet politicians want some control over intelligence, over what they do. So it's an eternal struggle. The Prime Minister is always in charge and can, at any point, remove anyone who causes problems at a very senior level. I mean, it is always there. But I think the Prime Minister also appreciates that spies need to operate. Spies need to operate with some freedom. They have to, because they have to stay. But it is always a struggle. I think there's always tension there. I always sensed it, that politics were very frustrating. Like, if the government's unstable, if the government is weak, and it in any way collides with what spies are doing, that's dangerous. So austerity, for example, budget cutbacks where there aren't enough of them. There aren't enough spies left to do their job. Things like that can really get right down to that level. But beyond that, they never talked about politics. It was never discussed. I never, ever met a single intelligence officer who mentioned politicians ever. They don't even seem to think about them. They just get on with their work.
How did it feel to never know anyone's real name?
It's the weirdest world. Nobody knows anything for sure. Everybody is suspicious of everybody else. You're always at a disadvantage. Everybody is always lying to you, always. You can't entirely believe anything from anyone. It's just the oddest thing I've ever experienced. It goes against everything I worked as a journalist for years, so truth was my thing. Finding out the truth was always the main thing I was interested in. But there, years later, I still don't know what the truth was. I still don't know. Everybody I met, of all the people I met then, which ones weren't the spies?
When you left, was there part of you that was paranoid, not sure who to trust, what to believe?
I mean, by the time I left, it felt like time to leave. It felt like time to do something different. I started writing a novel. I felt like I was ready to try something different. It was like somebody opened a door in a peaceful world for 5 years and they showed me war, because the spies are always at war. There was war all around us all the time. There is a war going on. We just don't see it. It's a cold war. It's a quiet war, but it's always raging. And it was so interesting. When you leave, the door shuts and it doesn't ever open again. And so suddenly you never know. I never knew. I was no longer at the center of anything, so I didn't know what was happening. I was always guessing like everybody else. Cutting off that knowledge, I felt that. I felt that lack of being at the center of things, of understanding what was happening, of knowing what was coming next week, of knowing what was going on behind the scenes. Yeah, that was weird for a variety of reasons, because that is a very stressful world to be part of. It was good. It was a good thing. It's good to have that off your shoulders. I'm still friends with a couple of people I believe to be in that world. And I know that 2 of them read my books. So I know they know what I'm doing. And neither of them is mad at me. So I think I'm doing okay. I think I'm all right. I don't think I've done anything too awful. I once did an event with a former head of MI5, a very senior MI5 person. I was at Cheltenham Literary Festival. So when I was working there, when I was working for the government, I largely worked with people in the middle. I didn't usually work with very senior people in intelligence at all. In fact, I think only once did I meet anybody very senior. So it was only afterwards that I then did an event at Cheltenham Literary Festival with a man named John Taylor, who was very senior at MI5 and has written a book about the psychology of spies. There is something about spies. They are extremely watchful. They are constantly learning about you, constantly observing things about you. It's subconscious. He still did it. He was retired. He was out many years, a good 5 years, I think he'd been out of that world. He'd retired. But I could still sense it. Like, it was weird. I hadn't had that feeling since I left the government. I asked John Taylor, who'd read my books, if I got anything horribly wrong, because there's things I want to get wrong. I don't want to give away anything that I'm not supposed to give away. In my first novel, a spy has to find and protect the son of a Russian dissident, basically, in London, that the Russians want to assassinate while an assassination team is out to get him. So she has a certain amount of time, 12 hours, to get him to safety. And he doesn't want to go. So it's this struggle between the two of them. It's almost like a two-hander, really. She can't get in touch with anybody in her office, like nobody from... She's an intelligence officer. They tell her she has to handle this one alone. They're stretched too thin. There's too much happening. There's a lot going on that night in the background of this book. So they're stretched very thin. And she knows that's not right. She knows she should never be alone. I asked John Taylor what I got wrong, and he said nobody would ever be left alone. Would never leave a spy alone. And I thought that was so good, because actually that made me really happy, because the whole premise of the book is she knows she should never be left alone. And I had no idea if spies should never be left alone out there. So that made me feel, there you go, there's a secret. They never work alone. Someone's always watching.
Tell us more about your writing and what's coming next.
Yes, I think I wanted to write about a female spy because I met so many female spies when I worked in that world. And that shocked me, because you don't see female spies in film that much, I suppose, and everything we know about spies, really. And we're always shown, you know, a Jason Bourne or a James Bond type spy. But in real life, young women, older women, like, they're everywhere. They're such good spies because nobody expects them. And so I knew I wanted to write about a woman in that world. And I wanted to write about the fact that nobody expects her. Like, I wanted that all to work in there. She's got to, when she's meeting somebody, she has to convince them who she is. I created a spy that's largely based in a way. In fact, she fits the description of that very first spy I met, the one who made me think she was my friend. In fact, I dedicated my first book to her because she changed how I looked at all of that world. Like, she was no more than 27 years old. She lied so fluidly. She was utterly believable and not at all what you would ever expect of a spy. And so that's what I wanted to create in my novel. So I created this character based on her. What I try to show in my novels is what I saw when I went to work for the government, that war behind the closed door. I wanted to open the door for people so they can see the same war I saw. There's nothing in my books that doesn't really happen. There's absolutely nothing. I'm writing about oligarchs, and some oligarchs are Russian spies. We know that. I'm writing about diplomats who are often spies. And so that is the world in which she operates. She finds them, figures out what they want, what they're planning, what they're doing, and stops them. So the first book's called The Chase, and the most recent one is called The Trap.
And where could they find it if they wanted to read more?
Oh, my books are everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Watchstones, wherever you buy books, you will find Ava Glass.